Okay, we'll just break out of that there because a media conference has just begun at Parliament House in Canberra with Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison.
And then Minister Morrison is going to make some opening remarks. I'm happy to take questions and then I have a plane to catch, so I'm going to duck off and then let Scott answer any questions that you may have for him. Obviously this morning we've had a very productive meeting, and I want to say thank you very much to all of the leaders, the community leaders who joined us today to talk about how we're going to make a new life for 12,000 people who are living in a very, very desperate situation. The message from the UNHCR, from IOM, from Red Cross in my discussions with them in Europe this week is that this is a very bad situation getting worse, and millions of people now have left Syria. Millions of people in Syria are displaced. The political turmoil in Syria shows no sign of resolution, and we have a very important job to do, along with many other countries around the world, to try and provide an opportunity for these people to start a new life. I'm very proud of the response that we've been able to provide, and I want to say thank you again to all of those people that we met with this morning who had some great suggestions around the way in which we could provide support through the screening process and then ultimately through their settlement here in Australia. Scott.
Thanks very much, Peter, and it's good to have you back and to get those reports. I'm joined here today, obviously, by Parliamentary Secretary Senator Fierravanti Wells, but also Paris Aristotle, who's the chair of the Refugee Resettlement Advisory Council, and Paris will have a little bit to say a little later after Peter has departed. But it was a very constructive meeting today. The purpose of the meeting today was really to identify ways where we can begin to really harness this incredibly large level of community support. This has been a very well received announcement, and there is an outpouring of support from people right across the community of all different backgrounds, of all different faiths, and it's important that we put in place measures to enable us to harness that, to direct it purposefully, to ensure that it delivers the support and the compassion that people are seeking to provide. And I want to thank all of those community leaders who came along today, and there'll be many more of these meetings. There'll be more direct engagements with quite specific communities of all different backgrounds, of all different faiths, to ensure we maintain the momentum long after the images that we've seen and that has sparked so much outpouring of support. This support needs to be maintained over a long time, because when you resettle someone in Australia, you resettle them for life. And that support has to be there over their lifetime and their family as they become great Australians, as they do. So that was an important part of today's meeting. The Refugee Resettlement Advisory Council will be meeting next week under Paris's leadership, and we will then go further into the task of breaking this process down. As I remarked this morning, we have already settled in the last 2 years almost 8,000 refugees and humanitarian entrants from Iraq and Syria. The focus of that intake has been, as it will be into the future, it is predominantly focused on those from persecuted minorities, around 70% in those categories, with the balance coming from other groups. And so the processes we have in place will continue to be applied. We are the best in the world at refugee and humanitarian resettlement, and those processes we put to work in this task we have going forward.
Okay, any questions?
I believe there was some questions raised about how the government itself would define what a persecuted minority was. Given you've said already that you will take the advice of the UNHCR on that, but the final decision will be yours to make as a government, can you tell us if you're any closer to defining what a persecuted minority is? Well,
as Scott's pointed out, we for many years have been able to identify people who are at risk of persecution because of their religion, because of threats otherwise, and I think it's important for people to understand not only is Australia the most generous in terms of the number of people that we settle under the refugee and humanitarian program, but we were ahead of the curve. Over the last couple of years, we have settled thousands of people from Syria and Iraq. We've been able to identify those people who are most at risk. We've been able to conduct the security checks, to conduct the health checks, and ultimately to allow those people a safe passage into Australian society. So, as Scott pointed out, as the Human Rights High Commissioner pointed out to me, Australia does settlement services very well and provides a clear pathway for people to come to Australia if they're in need, and all of that practice is well established, and we'll work with the UNHCR, other partners, to identify those who are most at need, and we'll provide that opportunity to them.
But will you provide a solid definition of what a persecuted?
Well, we'll have the same definition as we have in the past. That's the definition that will apply.
Could Alawites, which is the sort of strand of Islam from which Bashar al-Assad he practices, could Alawites, who are definitely persecuted in some parts of Syria, could they be accepted as a minority?
Well, James, it's a good point. So the response is that we have millions of people who have been displaced. There are over 4 million people who have been displaced from Syria. There are about 7 million in the country itself who are displaced. We are providing support to a significant number, but 12,000 is the number that we've indicated. Obviously, other European countries are providing their support as well. So we can't support everybody, but we will, as we go through the cases, have a look at those that are most in need. We'll provide that support, and as I say, there are well-established practices in relation to identifying those people.
Could I add 2 things to Peter's response? The Special Humanitarian Program and the Refugee Program work in parallel. The Refugee Program works predominantly through the UNHCR mandated process, and the Special Humanitarian Program, which has been restored under this government, works with community groups here and makes connections with those in these places of conflict. In order to be able to identify people, applications are made, assessments are made. So it is very much about the connection with Australia already, to the extent to which the communities, which are significantly targeted and persecuted in that part of the world, are able to connect with this process.
Were any Sunni community leaders invited, and how many attended?
Yes, they were.
And did any attend?
Yes, they did.
Which?
We will continue to work with all communities in this area, and that's one of the big tasks of the Settlement Services task. As I said, over a quarter of our intake from the refugee and humanitarian settlement program over the last 2 years, of that 8,000 from Iraq and Syria, have been of Islamic faith. Now, that is appropriate. The vast majority of those are Sunni, and we will continue to engage with those communities. Our door, when it comes to working with people on this, is open to everyone, and we will work with everyone. Invitations will be extended.
And that's where we say goodbye to viewers on ABC in WA. If you want to continue watching this media conference, switch to ABC News 24.
Ahead of the meeting, you were having a discussion with the Prime Minister about Port Moresby and the time that was taken in one of the meetings, and you said time doesn't mean anything when you're about to have water lapping at your door. What did you mean by that?
Well, I had a private conversation with the Prime Minister. I don't intend to comment publicly on that.
But what did you mean by that statement? It's being caught on camera, it's going to be seen across the Pacific Islands. What did you mean?
Well, as I say, I don't have anything to add to it. I had a private conversation with the Prime Minister, and I don't have anything to say further to that.
You don't want to explain what
Are there any other questions in relation to these matters?
Minister,
Yes, mate.
Earlier in the week we were hearing the first refugees might arrive before Christmas. Is there any update or any greater clarity on when we might start seeing people arrive?
I'm very confident that we can have people here before Christmas, and the department already has people in country working now with UNHCR and with other authorities, and there's an opportunity to bring people in the coming couple of months. I'm hoping well in advance of Christmas, but we've obviously got security and health checks to work through, so as soon as possible, but we are breaking every record to try and get the services in place, the support teams in place, so that we can bring people out of a terrible situation as quickly as possible.
We're definitely planning for that as well in terms of the settlement.
Yeah.
So when would you see them all 12,000 settled in Australia?
Well, this will take as long as it takes. As I said today, there is a clear process: identifying, assessing, checking, clearing, pre-departure support, arrival in Australia, establishment of the settlement services. You don't rush this. You do it properly, because that's what gets the best outcomes. We are the best in the world at refugee and humanitarian resettlement because we work our process well. And Paris has extensive experience on this, and we will go as quickly as we can, but we will work the model, we will work the process, because that gets the best outcome for the families and people who will be affected.
Can I just ask just on logistics? I mean, the scenes at the moment are really dreadful. Is there anything that Australia is doing right now to help people who could be our potential refugees with food or water?
Yes, so look, again, I think it's important to point out what has already happened. So Julie Bishop made an announcement, the Prime Minister made an announcement about an additional $44 million, but that was in addition to some $155 million that we've already committed to aid in Syria. So the number one message out of the meetings that I had with the leaders in Europe was that they needed financial support. People literally are flowing out of camps. Millions of people are within the camps or living within communities in Jordan, in Lebanon, northern parts of Iraq and elsewhere. So that support will provide direct assistance to them, and that, in addition to the number of places we've been able to offer, is exactly what they asked for.
I just want to ask, before you duck off, Minister Dutton, 62 people have died as a result of domestic violence this year. It's being called a national emergency. What is the government doing?
Well, I might, I'll make a quick comment and then I'll ask Scott, because obviously I think it's more in his area than immigration. I was a policeman for 10 years, a long time ago now, but one of the most horrific scenes that you could go to, and I can recall many now as you just at the mention of domestic violence, many scenes where you would go to where an assault had taken place. In many cases, kids had watched that violence taking place, and I think those scars stay with people forever. So at a federal government level, at a state government, local government, but most importantly within our community as well. I mean, blokes at work need to condemn domestic violence. When you're at a footy club on the weekend, you're involved in sport or activities otherwise, this is not just about a government response, but it's about a community response, because it's about changing the culture. And all of us commit ourselves to that. And obviously I think Scott's doing great work through his department, but across government otherwise. So, but Scott might have something more to say about that, and I'll go and catch a plane. All right, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Look, on that issue, and then what I might do is then I might throw to Paris to make a few comments, and Connie, then you might want to make a few comments. Tara Brown's death is just heartbreaking. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And once again, we see this happen as it happens every single week in this country, as we know. And there is no shortage of will and effort and application at a federal, state, a local, community level. But we need to take it further. We are awaiting the report back from Ken Lay and Rosie Batty, who have been leading a lot of the engagement in this area, and the government is standing at the ready to have the resources we've set aside to invest in the initiatives that will come forward in those recommendations. But we need to remember that you've got to deal with this at every level. State police agents, authorities, are doing what they're doing. In our area, we've got to deal with things like addressing online interactive gambling and how that leads to problem gambling, and that in effect also can result in this. Senator Fierravanti-Wells convened together with the Minister Cash an outstanding forum for multicultural and culturally and linguistically diverse communities, which I attended several weeks ago, where we were looking at the issues in those communities, which are different to the mainstream communities in Australia. You need to address this at every level, but what I want to assure Australians is this government, at every level, every party, every member of parliament, every councillor, every police officer, every nurse, every counsellor, everyone on the end of the 1-800 respect line, everyone wants to do whatever we can do so that we don't have to see again what we see. Sadly, this is a cultural challenge that infests, and we need to rid it, but it will take leadership, continued, and work, and that's what we're doing. On that, I might ask Paris. Paris is the chair of the Refugee Resettlement Advisory Council. I don't know of anyone who has more experience than Paris in this area, and I might ask him to make a few comments, and then Connie, you might do the same. Thanks. Paris.
Thanks very much, Minister. I guess the first thing to say is that in the meeting just then, and with everybody else I've spoken to, all of the church leaders, all of the heads of welfare agencies from different faith-based groups, all of the settlement services, all of the community organisations have welcomed this decision and this announcement and praised it unanimously. And personally, I think it's an absolutely wonderful commitment by the government to respond to what is an appalling crisis, which has seen many people die and millions displaced. So that's the first most critical point that I'd like to acknowledge. The second point I'd like to acknowledge is that, yes, there are real challenges associated with resettling refugees, but as the Minister has said, and as the High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, has said on multiple occasions, we have the best settlement services programs in the world. I've been doing this for 27 years now. I've seen it when we had people coming out of Bosnian rape camps. I've seen it when we've had Sudanese coming out of desperate situations in Africa, and Somalis and Eritreans with East Timorese and Bosnians and so forth. All of those crises bring with it terrible, terrible consequences. But in every single one of those situations, Australia as a country has been able to respond, to deal with the terrible trauma that people carry, the incredible sense of loss, and help them rebuild new lives in this country. And I'm absolutely confident with the incredible goodwill in the room and the clear support of the government, which is outstanding, but also the clear support of the whole Parliament in Australia, that we will be able to deal with this additional load. We'll take it in our stride, we'll plan carefully for it, and we'll ensure that the people that we get to bring here, the 12,000 people whose lives will literally be saved as a consequence of this commitment, that we'll look after them properly, and that they will not only recover from those experiences, but they'll go on to make a fantastic contribution to Australian society, just as thousands and thousands of other refugees have done in the past.
Thanks, Paris. Connie?
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Paris. Settlement in Australia has been a feature of our migration program since 1945. We have had 7.5 million migrants join us in Australia, including over 825,000 people under our humanitarian program. So we've been doing this not only well, Minister, but we've been doing it for a very, very long time. We have a very well established system that starts from before people arrive in Australia, and as far as our group of Syrians coming out from this terrible situation, those frameworks will be in place to assist them on this occasion. And then, of course, when they do arrive in Australia, we do have an established network of humanitarian service provision. We have settlement services grants. We have a whole range of things that help them virtually from the time that they get off the aeroplane, in terms of taking them to accommodation, orientation programs, the nuts and bolts of assisting them with life in Australia. And what's been very, very good about this morning is, again, we've seen those community networks that we've built up over many, many, many years now wanting to partner with us, to be with us again, to assist this particular group. And as Paris has said, we've seen different waves, and now we have a wave from this area, and our system is well established to deal with that.
Thank you, Connie. I should note that one of the things next week, the Red Cross will be co-opted next week onto the Refugee Resettlement Advisory Council. They were in attendance today, and look, that's one of the many organisations that can provide a very good interface between those who are the settlement service providers doing the work and the community more broadly. They're very experienced at handling public appeals. I'm not suggesting they'd necessarily be one of those, but what I am suggesting is they're very good at harnessing, directing the public support that will emerge, thankfully, in instances like this. So I welcome that involvement from the Red Cross, and I'm sure there are many other organisations that will be able to interface with as well. Any other questions before we wrap it up?
Just briefly, how damaging is it for Cabinet solidarity to have a list published in the paper?
Can we just focus on the issue of the meeting today? If there are any other issues on the issue of the meeting today, because then I'm sure Paris doesn't want to sit here and listen to political questions, and I'll excuse him. But
Senator Fierro-Vanderbilt, I'm just interested to know if you've spoken to Australia's Muslim leaders, like the Grand Mufti or his representatives, about his statements regarding prioritising Christians over Muslims. He said yesterday that it's another form of discrimination. He wants to see more Muslims taken as part of the
persecuted minorities? Have
Look,
you spoken to him about that?
I've had lots of engagement with many different communities in this role of multicultural affairs and settlement services. Can I particularly say that in recent months I have written to all Muslim groups in this country, and I am one by one visiting them around Australia, and that is an ongoing process where I have the opportunity to discuss a whole range of different things. I haven't seen the comments that the Grand Mufti has made, but as the Minister has said, our policy has been a non-discriminatory one, and our recent years and the intake that we have had in recent years has been a combination of Christians, Muslims. Basically, it has been non-discriminatory, and it will continue to be non-discriminatory. It has been the feature of our migration policy over a long time, and it will continue to do so.
It's not about someone's faith or belief. It's about prioritising areas of need. And as I said, it has been our practice now for 2 years since we came to government. Just around over a quarter have come by statistics from those of Muslim faith. The balance have come from other persecuted minorities, predominantly Christian, but there are other non-Christian groups that are in that area. And because in many areas, it's because that's where we're able to make the identifications and have the settlement opportunities here in Australia. But there is a large Sunni community here in Australia, and they have the same opportunity to walk through the special humanitarian program and the applications that are made, and that's where many have come from through the process over the last 2 years. So this is a continuation of a practice that we've had since we first come to government. The policies, the implementation, the practices, the assessment, all of this is things we've been doing for a long time. And Project Compassion is well underway. It has been now for several years. Project Compassion goes into a new gear as a result of the commitment that we've made, and Project Compassion being led particularly by Paris here as the head of our Refugee Resettlement Advisory Council, and the whole government working together. I think we'll see the results in this project as we've been pleased to see in other initiatives.
Do you worry that Sunni community leaders feel frozen out of meetings like this when there's such a plethora of Christian churches but not a substantial Sunni representation?
Well, I think it's important to be empathetic to how people feel about these things, and that's why Senator Fierravanti-Wells has been going door to door.
Literally, door to door,
and
across Australia.
And having one-on-one consultations. I've met with the Grand Mufti as well on many matters, and these personal relationships have built up over many times. You will all know my deep friendships with people like Jamal Rifi and Samir Dandan from the LMA and other groups, and we are engagement all the time. And so I respect all of these organisations, and we will find ways to engage in the best and most effective way. But the reason I pointed out those statistics today is to put some facts into the debate. And those facts demonstrate very clearly that we have taken people from the broad array of faiths, and we will continue to do that. There has been no outcry about the way we've done that to date, and the assurances we're giving is we will continue to follow the practice of focusing predominantly on the persecuted minorities, but that does leave room for those from other faiths who have family affected by these circumstances, and there are pathways to pursue that.
We've seen a surge of anti-immigrant sentiment in Australia through things like the Reclaim Australia rallies that have been held recently. What's the government doing in the wake of this resettlement announcement to placate or to inform that group of people about this announcement?
Well, I don't actually agree there has been a surge in the sentiment that you're talking about. Yes. I actually don't agree with that. If you look at any of the work which has been done by Peter Scanlon's outstanding organisation and the Scanlon Foundation, and the work that he has done in research, it actually shows there's an incredible level of support for the cultural diversity and cultural unity, I should say, as well, because that's what it's based on. That's why the support is there. Now, there are a range of opinions and views in this country, and that's as it is. But I don't accept the premise of the question. I think Australians are generous. I think Australians want to be able to help where they can, and they want to be able to help best where they can help best. And the program we've announced with 12,000 and the focus that it has, consistent with the policy that we've had since we've come to government, I think reflects that community view. And I'm frankly overwhelmed by the level of number of people contacting members' offices and others wanting to be involved. How can we help? And our challenge is, with working with Connie and Paris and the whole team, is how do we best harness that help? And I'd say to those people who want to open their room tomorrow afternoon to take someone in, you'll need to be patient with us as we work through this process. We will find the most effective way to harness your support and your contribution.
Can I just ask, are homestays on the table, or will new dwellings have to be built, do you think, or what other arrangements are you looking at?
No, I don't believe necessarily those things will be required. I think there'll be a range of programs we're already running that can be scaled to accommodate this. But there are suggestions made at our meeting today about how various groups can provide hosting, as they have already done. I mean, take the Mandaean communities. I mean, they haven't turned anyone away, since they've been here. And we've had one of the largest resettlements of the Mandaean population in Australia of any country in the world. And so these systems, these processes, these networks are already established. Yes. So we are going to harness them.
Yes. You mentioned Samir Dandan from the LMA. On Wednesday he said, in relation to the issue of persecuted minorities, he said, the LMA is obliged to condemn in the strongest terms the suggestion that priority should be given to people of one faith over another. Now, I understand that you're working hard to take both Christians and Muslims, but to you, Minister, and also Senator, do you think that the way in which it's been canvassed that priority should be given to Christians, or that some people would like to see priority given to Christians, do you think that's helpful given the talks you've been having with the LMA and other groups, and what would you say to Samir Dandan in relation to the statement that you released on Wednesday?
Well, you've answered your own question in your introduction, because as you've already acknowledged, we are working to take people from right across the board, but there is a focus. There is a focus, and there has always been a focus since we've been in government, and we will continue to maintain that focus. That focus is not based on someone's belief, it's based on someone's level of persecution and the focus of that persecution. And remember, we are taking permanent arrivals. And the reason we're doing that is we're recognising there are communities in the Middle East who will never be able to go back, ever. Not in 30 years, and their families won't be able to go back in 100 years because of what has happened in the Middle East. And so if you're going to offer permanent visas, then you need to focus them to those communities that need those, not just for one generation, but multiple generations. And that's what drives the decision making. And that's why we've been making the decisions we've been making for the last 2 years, and they will continue to inform our decision making going forward. Now, Samir's a good mate. We will talk regularly, and we won't always agree on the semantics of points and those sorts of things, but he's a good-hearted bloke, and he's always someone I've found who's prepared to listen and engage, and that's why I think he's the strong leader he is in that community.
Can I just add, there are persecuted Christian minorities and there are persecuted Muslim minorities. I mean, we've seen some of the horrific scenes with the Yazidis and some of the, particularly the Yazidi women. So as part of the consultations that I've had with Muslim communities, it has included Muslim communities and minority Muslim communities as well.
Okay. Another issue, Senator Fierravanti-Wells, do you think that we might see a cabinet reshuffle or ministerial reshuffle by the end of the year, and would you like to be given a greater role, maybe a ministerial role?
I don't think that's really appropriate for me. I think the Prime Minister's made comments in relation to that.
The Prime Minister's already given his answer on those matters, and I refer to that. I think he was fairly clear.
But Minister, my question was just in relation to cabinet solidarity and how much damage is done by the leaking of a list like this that suggests so many ministers are set to lose their jobs.
Well, the government didn't publish the list or write the list. It was written
the
in the media.
Was engaged in a jihad against the government too, then?
Very cheeky, James, and it's a good point for you to finish on. Thank you.
Okay, so that was live from Parliament House in Canberra. The Immigration Minister Peter Dutton initially there, along with the Social Services Minister Scott Morrison and others after that roundtable discussion this morning on the additional refugee intake for Australia over the coming year. Now to some news that's just come in during that media conference. A 57-year-old man involved in that fatal shooting at a Gold Coast fast food restaurant yesterday has died from that self-inflicted gunshot wound. 49-year-old Karina Locke was shot in the head in front